The rain fell heavy that October night, drumming against the cracked pavement of Mulberry Street, like the fingers of impatient men waiting for payment. Luca Moretti sat behind the wheel of the black Lincoln Continental, engine idling, wipers cutting through the downpour in rhythmic sweeps. He had been parked in this alley for 40 minutes, waiting for a call that might never come. That was the life of a driver in the Greco family. You waited, you listened, you never asked questions. Luca was 32, lean and quiet, with dark eyes that had seen too much and a mouth that had learned to say too little. He had driven for Don Salvatore Greco for 8 years, ferrying capos to midnight meetings, enforcers to jobs that left no witnesses, consiglieres to sit-downs where alliances were forged or shattered. He knew the weight of silence. He knew the price of loyalty. And he knew that men like him were invisible until the moment they were needed. The radio crackled, static then nothing. Luca glanced at his watch. 10:47. Marco Vitale, the underboss, had told him to be ready at 10:30 for a pickup at the old Torino social club, but Marco was late, or the meeting had run long, or something had gone wrong. Luca did not speculate. Speculation was dangerous. He reached for the pack of cigarettes on the dashboard, then stopped. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he saw them, an old man and an old woman, sitting on the curb beneath the broken awning of a boarded-up storefront. They were soaked through, their thin coats clinging to their bodies like wet newspaper. Between them sat 2 cardboard boxes, sagging in the rain, and a single black garbage bag tied at the top. The man had his arm around the woman's shoulders. She was shaking, not from cold, from something deeper. Luca stared. He should not have cared. He should have looked away. But something about the scene held him, the way the old man held his wife, the way she leaned into him, her head against his chest, as if his heartbeat was the only warmth left in the world. They were not asking for help. They were not begging. They were simply enduring. Luca killed the engine and stepped out into the rain. The water hit him like a baptism he did not deserve. He crossed the street, hands in the pockets of his black coat, and stopped a few feet from the couple. Up close he could see the details. The man was maybe 70, with a face carved by decades of labor, deep lines around his eyes and mouth. His hair was white and thin, plastered to his skull by the rain. The woman was smaller, frailer, her hands knotted with arthritis, clutching a faded photograph wrapped in plastic. Her eyes were closed. Luca cleared his throat. The man looked up, startled, his body tensing as if preparing for a blow. "You need help?" Luca asked. His voice was low, rough from years of cigarettes and silence. The man's eyes searched Luca's face, looking for the angle, the trick, the cruelty. Men like them had learned not to trust kindness. Kindness always came with a price. "We're fine," the man said. His voice was hoarse, brittle, just waiting for the shelter to open. "They said 8 in the morning." Luca glanced at his watch. 9 hours. 9 hours in the rain. "What happened?" Luca asked. The man hesitated. His wife's eyes opened, pale and watery, and she looked at Luca with the kind of exhaustion that comes from losing everything slowly, piece by piece, until there is nothing left but the person beside you. "Landlord evicted us," the man said finally. "Sold the building. Gave us 3 days to get out. We had nowhere to go. Our daughter, she lives upstate, but we haven't spoken in years. We thought we could make it to the shelter, but it was full. They told us to come back in the morning." Luca felt something tighten in his chest. He recognized the story. It was the same story playing out in every neighborhood the family controlled, every block where money moved faster than mercy. Landlords bought by developers, buildings emptied and flipped, families scattered like leaves in the wind. The Greco family did not cause it, but they profited from it. They owned pieces of the machine, and men like Luca drove the wheels. "You know the landlord's name?" Luca asked. The man blinked, surprised by the question. "Vincent De Luca. He came himself to throw us out, told us we should have saved more money, told us it was just business." Luca's jaw tightened. Vincent De Luca. He knew the name. A low-level associate, a fixer who handled real estate deals for Marco Vitale, a man who smiled too much and spoke too loud, who wore suits that cost more than most men earned in a month, a man who thought himself untouchable because he paid the right people. Luca looked at the couple again, the photograph in the woman's hands, the way the man's arm never left her shoulders, the quiet dignity in their suffering. He should have walked away. He should have gotten back in the car and waited for Marco's call. But something in him, some part that had not yet been beaten into silence, refused. "Come with me," Luca said. The man shook his head. "We can't pay you." "I'm not asking for money. Come on, get out of the rain." The man looked at his wife. She nodded, barely perceptible, and the man helped her to her feet. Luca picked up the cardboard boxes, one under each arm, and the garbage bag in his free hand. They crossed the street together, the rain falling harder now, drumming against the roof of the Lincoln as Luca opened the back door. The couple climbed inside, moving slowly, carefully, as if the car might vanish if they moved too fast. Luca set the boxes in the trunk and slid behind the wheel. He started the engine, cranked the heat, and pulled out of the alley. "Where are we going?" the man asked from the back seat. "Somewhere dry," Luca said. "Just for tonight." He drove east toward the waterfront, where the Greco family owned a network of properties used for storage, meetings, and the occasional disappearance. Most were locked tight, under surveillance, off-limits to anyone without approval. But Luca knew of one safe house that had been abandoned for months, ever since a deal went bad, and the property became too hot to use. It was a small two-story brick building, wedged between a warehouse and a shuttered factory, invisible unless you knew where to look. Luca parked in the alley behind the building and led the couple inside through a side door. The interior smelled of dust and mildew, but it was dry. There was a couch covered in a stained sheet, a small kitchen with a working stove, and a bathroom with running water. Enough to survive. "Stay here tonight," Luca said. "I'll bring food in the morning." The man stared at him, disbelief and gratitude warring in his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Luca did not answer. He did not know the answer himself. He only knew that walking away would have felt like another small death, another piece of himself surrendered to the machinery of the life he had chosen. "Lock the door behind me," Luca said. "Don't open it for anyone but me." He left before they could thank him, stepping back into the rain, back into the car, back into the life where kindness was a weakness and mercy was a liability. His phone buzzed. A text from Marco Vitale. "Change of plans. Pick me up at the estate. 1 hour." Luca stared at the message, then deleted it. He drove back toward the alley where he had been waiting, his mind turning over the name Vincent De Luca, the face of the old couple, the weight of the choice he had just made. He did not know it yet, but that choice had set something in motion, something that would unravel threads reaching all the way to the top of the Greco family, something that would bring secrets into the light and men into the shadows. The rain continued to fall, and in the darkness, wheels began to turn. Luca arrived at the Greco estate 53 minutes later, pulling through the iron gates and up the long gravel driveway lined with poplar trees. The mansion loomed ahead, a 3-story monument to power earned through blood and maintained through fear. Lights burned in the windows of the second floor, where the Don kept his private study. Luca had been inside that room only once, years ago, when he had first been brought into the family. He remembered the smell of cigar smoke and old leather, the weight of the Don's gaze, the way silence felt like judgment. Marco Vitale was waiting on the front steps, smoking a cigarette, his coat collar turned up against the rain. He was 45, broad-shouldered and handsome in the way of men who knew their own power, with slicked back hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was the Don's right hand, the enforcer of order, the architect of discipline. He was also ambitious. Everyone knew it. No one spoke of it. Luca stopped the car, and Marco slid into the passenger seat, bringing with him the smell of expensive cologne and wet pavement. "You're late," Marco said. "Traffic," Luca lied. Marco grunted, flicking his cigarette out the window. "Drive." Luca pulled away from the estate, heading back toward the city. Marco said nothing for several minutes, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his mind elsewhere. Luca knew better than to speak first. Finally, Marco broke the silence. "You hear about the De Luca situation?" Luca's hands tightened on the wheel. "No, Vincent De Luca, little rat bastard who handles property deals for us. Turns out he's been skimming, selling buildings we own through shell companies, pocketing the difference, thinking we wouldn't notice. The Don wants it handled." Luca kept his face neutral. "Handled how?" Marco smiled. "Quietly. Vincent's got a mouth. He talks too much, knows too many names. We can't just make him disappear. We need him to understand the cost of betrayal. We need him to feel it." Luca nodded, saying nothing. Inside, his mind raced. Vincent De Luca, the man who had evicted the old couple, the man who had thrown them into the rain, the man who was about to learn what it meant to cross the Greco family. "Drop me at the Torino Club," Marco said. "I've got a meeting. Pick me up at 2. Luca drove in silence. The rain drumming against the roof, the wipers cutting through the night. He dropped Marco at the club, watched him disappear inside, then sat alone in the car, staring at the neon sign above the door. He thought about the old couple in the safe house. He thought about Vincent DeLuca. He thought about the choices that brought men to this life, and the choices that kept them trapped inside it. Then he started the engine and drove back toward the waterfront, toward the safe house, toward the only act of mercy he had committed in years. He did not know that someone had been watching. He did not know that his kindness had been seen, and he did not know that the wheels he had set in motion would crush men far more powerful than Vincent DeLuca before they stopped turning. The rain fell, the city breathed, and in the darkness, the first betrayal took root. Luca returned to the safe house just after midnight, carrying a bag of groceries he had picked up from an all-night deli on Canal Street. Bread, cheese, canned soup, coffee, a carton of milk. Simple things, the kind of things that meant survival, not comfort. He knocked twice on the side door softly, the way men knock when they do not want to wake the dead or alert the living. The old man opened the door a crack, his eyes wide and fearful until he recognized Luca's face. Then the fear shifted into something else. Relief, gratitude, the kind of emotion that made Luca uncomfortable because he did not know what to do with it. "I brought food," Luca said, stepping inside. The woman was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket Luca had not left there. She must have found it in one of the upstairs closets. Her eyes followed Luca as he set the bag on the small kitchen table, unpacking the items one by one. The old man hovered nearby, unsure whether to help or stay out of the way. "There's a stove," Luca said. "Gas still works. You can heat the soup. Coffee's in the bag. I'll bring more tomorrow." "You don't have to do this," the woman said. Her voice was soft, worn smooth by years of speaking gently to a world that had stopped listening. "We're grateful, but you don't have to keep helping us." Luca looked at her. In the dim light of the safe house, her face seemed older, more fragile, like paper that had been folded and unfolded too many times. But her eyes held something unbroken, dignity, the kind that poverty and cruelty could not steal. "I know," Luca said, "but I'm going to anyway." The old man extended his hand. "My name's Thomas Brennan. This is my wife, Eleanor." Luca shook his hand. The grip was weak, the skin papery, but the gesture carried weight. "Luca." "You got family, Luca?" Thomas asked. Luca hesitated. "No, not anymore." Eleanor nodded as if she understood. "We had a daughter once, Caroline. She left when she was 18, said she wanted a different life. We haven't heard from her in 20 years. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about us, if she knows we're still alive." Luca did not know what to say to that. He had learned long ago that some pain could not be answered, only witnessed. He finished unpacking the bag and turned toward the door. "Lock this behind me," he said. "Don't answer if anyone else knocks." "Luca," Thomas said, "why are you helping us?" Luca stopped, his hand on the doorknob. He thought about the question. He thought about the old couple sitting in the rain, about Vincent DeLuca's smile, about Marco Vitale's orders, about the Don's cold gaze. He thought about all the things he had done in the name of loyalty, all the silences he had kept, all the men he had driven to their deaths without asking why. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe because no one else would." He left before they could respond, stepping back into the rain, back into the car, back into the life where mercy was a sin and kindness was a death sentence. But he did not go home. Instead, he drove to the Torino Social Club, parking across the street in the shadows where the streetlights did not reach. He watched the entrance, waiting. At 2:15 in the morning, Marco Vitale emerged, flanked by two soldiers Luca recognized. Paoli Cenzo, a thick-necked enforcer with a taste for violence, and Dominic Russo, a younger man with dead eyes and quick hands. They stood on the sidewalk, talking in low voices, their breath misting in the cold air. Luca started the engine and pulled up to the curb. Marco climbed into the passenger seat, and the two soldiers got into the back. The smell of cigar smoke and whiskey filled the car. "The estate," Marco said. Luca drove. No one spoke. The silence in the car was heavy, thick with unspoken things. Luca kept his eyes on the road, his mind turning over the pieces of the puzzle. Vincent DeLuca, the eviction, the skimming, Marco's orders, the old couple in the safe house. "You know the Brennan building on Mulberry?" Marco said suddenly. Luca's hands tightened on the wheel. "No. Vincent DeLuca sold it last week, kicked out the tenants, pocketed the money, thought we wouldn't notice. But the Don noticed. The Don notices everything. Cenzo laughed from the back seat. Vincent's a dead man, he just doesn't know it yet. Marco turned to look at Luca. You ever meet Vincent? No, Luca lied. He's a talker, loud, thinks he's smarter than everyone else, thinks he can steal from the family and walk away. The Don wants to teach him a lesson, a public lesson. Luca said nothing. He drove through the empty streets, the rain falling harder now, the wipers struggling to keep pace. He thought about Thomas and Eleanor Brennan, sitting in the safe house eating canned soup, holding each other in the dark. He thought about Vincent DeLuca, somewhere in the city, unaware that his hours were numbered. Drop us at the estate, Marco said. Then go home. I'll call you tomorrow. Luca pulled through the iron gates and up the gravel driveway. The mansion was dark now, except for a single light burning in the Don's study. Marco and the two soldiers climbed out, and Luca watched them disappear inside. Then he sat alone in the car, staring at the light in the window, wondering what orders were being given, what punishments were being planned, what blood would be spilled in the name of loyalty. He should have driven home. He should have slept. But instead, he drove back to the safe house, back to the old couple, back to the only choice he had made that felt like his own. When he arrived, the lights were still on inside. He knocked, and Thomas opened the door immediately, as if he had been waiting. Is everything all right? Thomas asked. No, Luca said, but it will be. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Eleanor was still on the couch, the photograph clutched in her hands. Luca sat down across from them, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. The man who evicted you, Luca said. Vincent DeLuca. He's in trouble. Big trouble. The people he works for, they don't forgive mistakes. And he made a big one. Thomas frowned. What does that have to do with us? I don't know yet, Luca admitted. But I need you to stay here. Don't leave. Don't talk to anyone. And if anyone comes looking for you, don't answer the door. Eleanor's eyes widened. Are we in danger? Luca hesitated. I don't think so. But the man who threw you out, he's connected to people you don't want to meet. And I don't know how deep this goes yet. Thomas nodded slowly. You're one of them, aren't you? You work for the Mafia. Luca did not deny it. There was no point. I'm a driver. I take people where they need to go. I don't ask questions. I don't make decisions. I just drive. But you helped us, Eleanor said softly. Why? Luca looked at her, at the photograph in her hands, at the way her husband sat beside her, protective even in his frailty. He thought about his own family, long gone, scattered by violence and time. He thought about the life he had chosen, the silence he had accepted, the loyalty he had sworn. Because someone should, he said. He left them there, in the safe house, in the only place in the city where they were safe. And as he drove away, he made a decision. He would find out what Vincent DeLuca had done. He would find out why Marco Vitale wanted him punished, and he would protect the old couple, even if it meant crossing lines he had never crossed before. The rain fell, the city slept, and in the darkness, the machinery of betrayal continued to turn. 3 days later, the Greco family held a feast. It was an old tradition, one that dated back to the Don's father and his father before him. A gathering of the inner circle, the capos and soldiers and consiglieres, held in the basement of the Torino Social Club. Long tables covered in white cloth, candles burning in brass holders, platters of roasted lamb and pasta and wine. The kind of feast where alliances were tested, where loyalty was proven, where men ate and drank and smiled while measuring the distance between friendship and betrayal. Luca was not invited. Drivers never were. But Marco Vitale ordered him to be ready outside, in case anyone needed to leave early. So Luca sat in the Lincoln, parked in the alley behind the club, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and voices drifting through the walls. He had checked on Thomas and Eleanor twice in the past 3 days, bringing food and blankets and promises that they were safe. But each time he left, he felt the weight of the lie. They were not safe. No one connected to Vincent DeLuca was safe. And Luca was connected now, whether he wanted to be or not. At 10:30, the back door of the club opened and Cenzo stepped out, dragging a man behind him. The man was young, maybe 30, with dark hair and a bloody nose. His hands were tied behind his back and he stumbled as Paulie shoved him toward the alley. Luca recognized him immediately. Vincent DeLuca. Dominic Russo followed, carrying a shovel. Marco Vitale came last, his coat unbuttoned, a glass of wine still in his hand. He looked relaxed, almost amused, as if this were just another task on a long list of tasks. Luca, Marco called. Pop the trunk. Luca's heart hammered in his chest. He climbed out of the car and opened the trunk, his face blank, his mind racing. Vincent was sobbing now, begging, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate cascade. "Please, Marco, I can fix this. I can pay it back. I swear I didn't mean to. I just needed the money. My wife, she's sick. Please, I have kids. Please." Marco silenced him with a backhand across the face. Vincent crumpled, blood dripping from his split lip. "Put him in the trunk," Marco said. Paulie and Dominic lifted Vincent and shoved him inside. He curled into a ball, whimpering, his eyes wide with terror. Luca stared at him, at the man who had evicted Thomas and Eleanor, who had smiled and called it business, who had taken everything from people who had nothing. Luca felt no pity, but he felt something else, a cold, spreading certainty that this was only the beginning. Marco closed the trunk and turned to Luca. "Drive to the warehouse on Pier 17. You know the one?" Luca nodded. He knew the one. It was where men went when they needed to disappear, where bodies were wrapped in plastic and weighted with chains and dropped into the river, where the city swallowed its secrets. He climbed behind the wheel, and Marco got into the passenger seat. Paulie and Dominic squeezed into the back. The car smelled of blood and fear. Luca drove in silence, his mind turning over the options, the choices, the consequences. He could do nothing. He could follow orders. He could drive Vincent De Luca to his death and go home and forget the old couple in the safe house. He could remain invisible, loyal, silent. Or he could make a choice. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and skeletal against the night sky. Luca pulled into the gravel lot and parked near the loading dock. Marco got out first, stretching, his breath misting in the cold air. "Bring him inside," Marco said. Paulie and Dominic hauled Vincent out of the trunk. He was barely conscious now, his face swollen, his body limp. They dragged him toward the warehouse entrance, and Marco followed, whistling softly, as if this were just another night. Luca stood alone by the car, staring at the open trunk, at the smear of blood on the carpet. He thought about Thomas and Eleanor. He thought about the photograph Eleanor clutched. He thought about the life he had chosen and the man he had become. Then he made a choice. He closed the trunk, climbed back into the car and drove away. He did not go far, just to the end of the pier, where he parked and waited, the engine idling, his hands gripping the wheel. He did not know what he was waiting for. He only knew that he could not watch another man die without asking why. Inside the warehouse the feast continued, and in the darkness the first cracks began to show. Luca sat in the car for 20 minutes, staring at the warehouse, listening to the distant sound of waves slapping against the pier. The city was quiet at this hour, the kind of quiet that felt heavy, pregnant with violence waiting to be born. He knew what was happening inside. He had driven men to places like this before. He had waited in the car while they did what needed to be done. He had never asked questions. He had never looked back. But tonight was different. Tonight, he had made a choice that could not be unmade. His phone buzzed. A text from Marco. "Where the hell are you?" Luca stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. He could lie. He could say the car had stalled, that he had gone to get gas, that he would be back in 5 minutes. But lies only bought time, and time was running out. He typed a reply. Had to move the car. Cops were circling. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then nothing. Luca waited, his heart pounding in his chest, his mouth dry. He knew Marco did not believe him. Marco was not a fool. Marco had survived in the Greco family for 20 years by reading men the way other men read newspapers. He would know something was wrong. He would know Luca had broken protocol. The question was, what would he do about it? Luca started the engine and drove back toward the warehouse, pulling into the gravel lot. The loading dock was empty now, the doors closed. He climbed out of the car and walked toward the entrance, his footsteps crunching on the gravel, his breath misting in the cold air. The door opened before he could knock. Dominic Russo stood in the doorway, his face expressionless, his eyes flat and cold. "Marco wants to see you," Dominic said. Luca followed him inside. The warehouse was vast and empty, filled with shadows and the smell of rust and salt water. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a pale circle of illumination in the center of the space. Marco stood beneath it, his hands in his pockets, his coat unbuttoned. Paulie Cenzo was beside him, wiping blood from his knuckles with a handkerchief. Vincent De Luca was on the floor, curled into a fetal position, his face unrecognizable. He was still breathing, but barely. Each breath came in shallow, wet gasps, as if his lungs were filling with fluid. Marco looked up as Luca approached. His expression was calm, almost pleasant, but his eyes were hard. "Where were you?" Marco asked. "Cops were driving by," Luca said. I moved the car so they wouldn't see it parked near the warehouse. Marco nodded slowly. Smart. Can't be too careful. Luca said nothing. He kept his face neutral, his posture relaxed, even as his mind raced. Marco was testing him, watching for the lie, the hesitation, the crack in the facade. How you know what Vincent did? Marco asked, gesturing toward the broken man on the floor. You said he was skimming, Luca replied. He was, but it's worse than that. Vincent was selling properties we use for laundering, buildings we need to stay clean. He sold them to developers, pocketed the cash, and left us exposed. The Don could have lost everything because of this greedy little rat. Marco crouched down beside Vincent, studying him the way a scientist might study a specimen. So you know what the worst part is? He didn't even need the money. His wife isn't sick, he doesn't have kids, he just wanted more, always more. That's the problem with men like Vincent. They don't understand that loyalty is worth more than gold. Marco stood and turned back to Luca. The Don wants to send a message. He wants everyone to know what happens when you betray the family. So we're not going to kill Vincent. Not yet. We're going to let him live. But we're going to make sure he remembers what he did. Every day for the rest of his life. Paulicenzo smiled. It was the kind of smile that made Luca's skin crawl. Take him to the old meatpacking plant on Vernon Street, Marco said. There's a room in the back. Chain him up. Someone will bring him food and water once a week. Let him think about his choices. Luca's stomach turned. A slow death. A living grave. It was worse than a bullet. It was a punishment designed to break a man's soul. You got a problem with that? Marco asked, his eyes locked on Luca's face. No, Luca said. Good. Then help Paulie get him in the trunk. Luca and Paulie lifted Vincent's limp body and carried him out to the car. Vincent groaned but did not resist. He was beyond resistance now, beyond hope. They shoved him into the trunk, and Paulie slammed it shut. Follow me, Paulie said, climbing into a black Cadillac parked nearby. I'll show you where to go. Luca got behind the wheel and followed Paulie through the empty streets, his mind churning. He thought about Vincent DeLuca, broken and bleeding in the trunk. He thought about Thomas and Eleanor Brennan, sleeping in the safe house, unaware that the man who had destroyed their lives was now suffering a fate worse than death. He thought about the choice he had made 3 days ago, the act of mercy that had set all of this in motion. And he wondered if mercy was ever worth the cost. The meatpacking plant was a ruin, a crumbling brick structure surrounded by chain-link fencing and weeds. Paulie unlocked the gate and drove inside, and Luca followed. They parked near a loading dock, and Paulie led the way into the building, carrying a heavy chain and a padlock. The room in the back was small and windowless, with concrete walls and a drain in the floor. The smell of old blood lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. Paulie chained Vincent to a metal pipe bolted to the wall, looping the chain through his wrists and securing it with the padlock. Vincent's eyes fluttered open. He stared at Luca, his lips moving, trying to form words. But no sound came out, only a wet, gurgling rasp. Let's go, Paulie said, wiping his hands on his pants. Marco wants us back at the club. Luca followed him out, leaving Vincent alone in the darkness, chained like an animal, waiting for a death that would never come. They drove back to the Torino club in silence. Paulie smoked a cigarette, humming to himself, as if they had just finished a routine errand. Luca kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. When they arrived, Marco was waiting outside, talking on his phone. He hung up as Luca and Paulie approached. It's done, Marco asked. Yeah, Paulie said. He's not going anywhere. Marco nodded. Good. The Don will be pleased. He turned to Luca. Go home, get some sleep. I'll call you tomorrow. Luca did not go home. He drove straight to the safe house, his mind a storm of anger and guilt and fear. He parked in the alley and sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the building, at the faint light glowing in the upstairs window. He had saved Thomas and Eleanor from the rain, but he had also delivered Vincent DeLuca to a living hell, and he did not know which choice defined him more. He climbed out of the car and knocked on the door. Thomas opened it immediately, his face lined with worry. Luca, is everything all right? No, Luca said, but I need to tell you something. He stepped inside. Eleanor was sitting on the couch, the photograph still in her hands. She looked up as Luca entered, her eyes searching his face. The man who evicted you, Luca began. Vincent DeLuca. He's been punished by the people he worked for. He won't be bothering you again. He won't be bothering anyone again. Thomas frowned. What did they do to him? Luca hesitated. He did not want to lie, but he could not tell them the truth. The truth was too dark, Too heavy, too final. They made sure he understands what he did wrong, Luca said carefully. That's all you need to know. Eleanor set the photograph down on the couch beside her. Did you have anything to do with it? Luca met her gaze. I drove the car. That's what I do. I drive. But you didn't hurt him, she said. It was not a question, it was a plea. Luca looked away. I didn't hurt him. It was the truth, but it was also a lie, because inaction was a choice, and silence was complicity, and every mile he drove carried him deeper into the machinery of violence that defined his life. Thomas placed a hand on Luca's shoulder. Thank you, for everything, for giving us shelter, for standing up for us when no one else would. Luca nodded, unable to speak. He felt the weight of their gratitude like a stone in his chest, pressing down, suffocating. He did not deserve their thanks. He did not deserve their trust. He was a driver for the Greco family, a man who had spent 8 years ferrying killers to their work and victims to their deaths. One act of mercy did not erase 8 years of silence. Stay here, Luca said finally. Don't leave. I'll figure out what to do next. He left before they could respond, stepping back into the night, back into the car, back into the life where every choice came with a price, and every act of kindness was a thread pulling him toward his own unraveling. He drove aimlessly for an hour, through streets he knew by heart, past buildings that had stood for generations and others that had been torn down and rebuilt in the name of progress. He thought about the city, about the way it devoured people, about the way men like Vincent DeLuca and Thomas Brennan were just fuel for a machine that never stopped grinding. He thought about Eleanor's question, did you hurt him? And he realized the truth. He had not hurt Vincent DeLuca, but he had not saved him either. And in the world Luca inhabited, there was no difference between the two. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The Don wants to see you. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The estate. Luca stared at the message, his blood turning to ice. The Don never summoned drivers. The Don never spoke to men like Luca unless something had gone very wrong. He deleted the message and drove home, his mind racing. He did not sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed staring at the wall, replaying every choice he had made in the past week, every word he had spoken, every lie he had told, and he wondered if the Don already knew. The morning came cold and grey, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain but never delivered. Luca dressed in his best suit, a black two-piece he had bought for his father's funeral 8 years ago. He drove to the Greco estate slowly, carefully, as if delaying the inevitable might change the outcome. The gates opened as he approached, and he drove up the gravel driveway, past the poplar trees, past the fountain in the courtyard, past the stone lions guarding the entrance. He parked near the front steps and climbed out, his legs heavy, his chest tight. A soldier met him at the door, a man Luca did not recognize, young and silent, with eyes that gave nothing away. He led Luca inside, through the marble foyer, up the grand staircase, down a long hallway lined with portraits of men long dead. They stopped at a heavy wooden door. The soldier knocked twice, then opened it and stepped aside. Luca entered. The Don's study was exactly as he remembered. Dark wood paneling, shelves lined with leather-bound books, a massive desk carved from mahogany. Cigar smoke hung in the air like incense, and behind the desk sat Don Salvatore Greco, the man who ruled the family with an iron fist wrapped in velvet. He was 73, with silver hair slicked back, a thin mustache and eyes like black glass. He wore a grey suit, perfectly tailored, and a gold ring on his right hand that caught the light when he moved. "Sit," the Don said. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Luca sat in the chair across from the desk, his hands folded in his lap, his face calm even as his heart hammered in his chest. The Don studied him for a long moment, saying nothing. Then he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who knew every secret, every lie, every betrayal. "You've been with the family for 8 years, the Don said. "A good driver, loyal, quiet, never a problem." "Thank you, Don Greco," Luca said. "Marco speaks highly of you, says you're reliable, says you follow orders without question." Luca nodded. "I do my job." The Don leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Then tell me, Luca, why did you help the old couple?" The question hung in the air like smoke, thick and inescapable. Luca felt the weight of it pressing down on him, forcing the air from his lungs. The Don knew. Of course he knew. The Don always knew. Luca had 2 choices. He could lie, deny everything, play the part of the loyal soldier who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or he could tell the truth and accept whatever punishment came with it. He chose the truth. They were sitting in the rain, Luca said quietly. An old man and his wife. They had nowhere to go. Vincent de Luca had thrown them out of their home. I couldn't just leave them there. The Don's expression did not change. He continued to study Luca with those black glass eyes, as if reading the contents of his soul. You put them in a safe house, the Don said. One of our safe houses. Without permission, without authorization. You gave family resources to strangers. Yes, Luca said. I did. Why? Luca hesitated. How could he explain it? How could he put into words the feeling that had gripped him when he saw Thomas and Eleanor sitting in the rain, the way their suffering had pierced through 8 years? Of carefully constructed numbness. Because it was the right thing to do, Luca said finally. The Don's eyes narrowed. The right thing. And what do you think this family is built on, Luca? What do you think keeps us strong, keeps us alive in a world that wants to destroy us? Is it doing the right thing? Is it mercy? Is it kindness? No, Don Greco. Then what? Loyalty, Luca said. And fear. The Don nodded slowly. Yes, loyalty and fear, the two pillars that hold this family together. Loyalty to each other, fear of what happens when that loyalty is broken. But you, Luca, you chose mercy over loyalty. You chose two strangers over the family. Luca said nothing. There was nothing to say. The Don was right. He had broken the rules. He had chosen his own conscience over the code that governed the family, and now he would pay the price. The Don stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He stared out at the estate, at the manicured lawns and the iron gates and the world beyond. Do you know why I summoned you here, Luca? The Don asked. To punish me, Luca said. The Don turned, and for the first time, something like emotion flickered across his face. Not anger, not disappointment, something deeper, something almost like sadness. No, the Don said. I summoned you here because of who those people are. Luca frowned. I don't understand. The Don returned to his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a folder, yellowed with age, and set it on the desk between them. He opened it, revealing a photograph. A black and white image, grainy and faded, of a young man and woman standing in front of a small bakery. The man wore a white apron, his arm around the woman's shoulders. She was smiling, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. Luca stared at the photograph. The man was younger, stronger, but the face was unmistakable. Thomas Brennan. That photograph was taken in 1972, the Don said. The bakery was on Hester Street, right in the heart of Little Italy. Thomas Brennan owned it. He made the best bread in the neighborhood. Everyone knew him. Everyone loved him. Luca looked up at the Don, confusion written across his face. I don't understand. What does this have to do with... My father, the Don said, cutting him off. My father, Antonio Greco, was shot in 1973. An ambush. 5 men with shotguns right outside his social club. He survived, but barely. Lost half his blood before we got him to a doctor. The doctor said he needed a transfusion, but we couldn't take him to a hospital. Too many questions. Too much risk. The Don paused, his gaze distant as if looking back through the decades. Thomas Brennan saved my father's life, the Don continued. He had the same blood type. O negative, universal donor. We brought my father to the back room of the bakery, and Thomas gave his blood without hesitation. Didn't ask for money, didn't ask for protection, didn't ask for anything. He just helped because he could. Because it was, as you say, the right thing to do. Luca felt the world tilt beneath him. The old man in the safe house, the man who had been thrown into the rain by Vincent de Luca. That man had saved the life of Don Antonio Greco, the founder of the family, the man whose legacy still shaped every decision, every alliance, every act of violence. After my father recovered, the Don said, he wanted to repay Thomas, offered him money, protection, a place in the family, but Thomas refused, said he didn't want anything to do with our world, said he just wanted to live a quiet life with his wife and daughter. My father respected that. He made sure Thomas was left alone, made sure no one touched him or his family, made sure the bakery stayed safe even when the neighborhood changed, even when the violence came. The Don closed the folder and looked at Luca. But I forgot. Over the years, as my father's memory faded, as the old debts were buried by new ones, I forgot what Thomas Brennan had done for us. I forgot the debt we owed him. And so when Vincent de Luca came to me with a plan to buy the Brennan building, to clear it out and flip it for profit, I approved it. I let it happen. I let Thomas and Eleanor be thrown into the street because I did not remember. Luca's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place now, the connections forming like threads in a web. Vincent De Luca had not just stolen from the family. He had destroyed the life of a man who had saved the Don's father. And Marco Vitale, in his eagerness to punish Vincent, had never known the full story. "You saved them," the Don said quietly. "You did what I should have done. You honored a debt I had forgotten. And for that, Luca, I owe you." Luca shook his head. "I didn't know, Don Greco. I didn't know about your father. I just saw two people who needed help." "I know," the Don said. "That's why it matters. You acted without knowing the history, without expecting a reward. You acted because you saw suffering and chose to stop it. That is rare, Luca. Rarer than you know. In this life, men like us, we learn to look away. We learn to harden our hearts, to close our eyes, to let the world burn as long as we stay warm. But you didn't. You saw something worth saving and you saved it." The Don sat down again, his expression thoughtful. "There is a lesson here, a lesson I should have learned long ago. Loyalty is not just about obeying orders. It is not just about fear and blood and silence. Loyalty is also about remembering who helped us when we had nothing, remembering who stood beside us when everyone else walked away, remembering the debts we owe, even when the world forgets." Luca felt something loosen in his chest. The fear that had gripped him since the moment he entered the study began to fade, replaced by something he could not quite name: relief, gratitude, perhaps even hope. "What do you want me to do, Don Greco?" Luca asked. The Don leaned back in his chair. "I want you to bring Thomas and Eleanor here, to the estate. I want to speak with them. I want to apologize for what was done to them, and I want to make it right." Luca nodded. "I'll bring them." "And Luca," the Don said, his voice hardening. "Vincent De Luca. Where is he now?" "The meat-packing plant on Vernon Street," Luca said. "Marco ordered him chained up, left to rot." The Don's jaw tightened. "Marco does not know the full story. He acted on incomplete information. That is my fault, not his. But Vincent's punishment must be reconsidered. He stole from the family, yes, but he also destroyed the life of a man who saved my father. That is a different crime, a deeper crime, one that requires a different kind of justice." The Don stood, signaling that the meeting was over. "Bring Thomas and Eleanor here this evening, 7 o'clock. I will have a meal prepared. And Luca, do not speak of this to Marco or anyone else. Not yet. This is between you, me, and the debt we owe." Luca stood and nodded. "Yes, Don Greco." He left the study, his mind spinning. The soldier who had let him in was waiting in the hallway, and he escorted Luca back downstairs through the foyer out to the front steps. Luca climbed into the Lincoln and sat behind the wheel, staring at the mansion, at the light burning in the Don's study. He had come here expecting punishment. He had come here expecting to pay for his disobedience with blood or exile or worse. Instead, he had learned a secret, a debt, a connection that stretched back decades, binding the Greco family to an old man and his wife who had long since been forgotten by the world. Luca started the engine and drove back toward the safe house, his thoughts turning to Thomas and Eleanor. He wondered if they knew. He wondered if Thomas remembered the night he had saved a dying man in the back room of his bakery, if he remembered the blood, the fear, the gratitude in Antonio Greco's eyes. He wondered if mercy always came full circle, or if this was just a rare exception, a moment of grace in a world defined by cruelty. When he arrived at the safe house, Thomas opened the door immediately, his face lined with worry. "Luca, we were starting to think something had happened to you." "I'm fine," Luca said, "but I need to talk to you both." He stepped inside. Eleanor was sitting on the couch, the photograph still beside her. She looked up as Luca entered, her eyes searching his face. "I need to ask you something," Luca said, sitting down across from them. "Thomas, do you remember a night in 1973? A night when some men brought an injured man to your bakery, a man who had been shot?" Thomas's eyes widened. He glanced at Eleanor, then back at Luca. "How do you know about that?" "Because the man you saved," Luca said, "was Antonio Greco, the father of the man who runs the family I work for, the father of Don Salvatore Greco." Thomas sank back into the couch, his face pale. "I'd forgotten. It was so long ago. They came in the middle of the night, 3 men carrying a 4th who was bleeding out. They said they couldn't go to a hospital. They asked if I could help. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know what they did. I just knew a man was dying and I had the same blood type." Eleanor placed a hand on her husband's arm. "You never told me the details. You just said you'd helped someone who needed it." "I didn't want you to worry," Thomas said quietly. I didn't want you to know I'd gotten involved with people like that. After it was over, they thanked me and left. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't, Luca said. The Don never forgot. He remembered what you did. And when he found out what Vincent DeLuca had done to you, he wanted to make it right. He wants to see you both, tonight. At his estate, he wants to apologize. Thomas shook his head. I don't want anything from them. I just want to live in peace. I know, Luca said, but the Don is not a man who forgets his debts. And he owes you. He owes you more than you know. Eleanor looked at Luca, her eyes filled with something between fear and hope. Will we be safe? Yes, Luca said. I promise. The Don wants to help you. He wants to give you back what was taken from you. Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, we'll go. But only because you're asking, Luca. Only because you helped us when no one else would. Luca felt the weight of their trust, the way it pressed down on him like a physical thing. He had given them his word. He had promised they would be safe. And now he had to make sure that promise held, even in a world where promises were broken as easily as bones. That evening, Luca drove Thomas and Eleanor to the Greco estate. They sat in the back seat, dressed in the best clothes they had salvaged from the eviction, their hands clasped together, their faces lined with worry. Luca said nothing during the drive. There was nothing to say. Words could not ease the fear of walking into the lion's den, even when the lion claimed to be a friend. The gates opened as they approached, and Luca drove up the gravel driveway. He parked near the front steps, and a soldier opened the door, helping Thomas and Eleanor out of the car with surprising gentleness. The Don was waiting in the foyer, dressed in a dark suit, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at Thomas and Eleanor, and for the first time in Luca's memory, the Don's face softened. Thomas, the Don said. Eleanor, thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult for you. Thomas nodded, his voice cautious. You wanted to see us. I did, the Don said, because I owe you an apology, and a debt, one that should have been paid long ago. He gestured toward the dining room. Please, join me. We have much to discuss. Luca stood by the door, watching as Thomas and Eleanor followed the Don inside. He did not know what would happen next. He did not know if the Don's words were genuine, or if this was simply another move in a game Luca did not fully understand. But he knew one thing. He had made a choice. He had chosen mercy over silence, and whatever came next he would face it without regret. Inside the dining room, the Don sat at the head of a long table set with white linen and fine china. Thomas and Eleanor sat across from him, their hands still clasped together. Luca stood near the door, silent and watchful. The Don poured wine into 3 glasses and slid 2 across the table. In 1973, you saved my father's life. You asked for nothing in return. You simply helped because you could. That kind of decency, that kind of courage is rare. Rarer than gold. Rarer than loyalty. Thomas took a sip of wine, his hand trembling slightly. I just did what anyone would do. No, the Don said firmly. Most men would have turned us away. Most men would have been too afraid, too smart, too selfish. But you were none of those things. You were simply good, and my father never forgot that. He made sure you were protected, made sure your bakery stayed safe, made sure you could live the life you wanted without interference. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Then why did Vincent DeLuca destroy us? Why did he take everything? The Don's expression darkened. Because I forgot. Because in my arrogance, in my focus on the present, I let the past slip away. I did not remember the debt my father owed you, and so when Vincent came to me with his plan, I approved it. I signed the order that led to your eviction, and for that I am deeply sorry. Thomas set down his glass. What do you want from us? Nothing, the Don said. I want to give you back what was taken. A home, security, peace. I own a building on Carmine Street, a small apartment house with good tenants and a view of the park. The top floor is empty. It's yours. No rent, no conditions, just a place to live for as long as you need it. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Thomas stared at the Don, disbelief written across his face. Why? Thomas asked. Why do this now? Because a driver named Luca reminded me of something I should never have forgotten, the Don said, glancing at Luca. That mercy is not weakness. That kindness is not a sin. That some debts can never be repaid, only honored. The Don stood and extended his hand to Thomas. I cannot undo what was done, but I can make sure it never happens again. Will you accept my apology? Thomas hesitated, then stood and shook the Don's hand. Yes, thank you. The Don nodded, then turned to Luca. Take them to the building on Carmine Street. Make sure they have everything they need. And Luca, you've done well. You've reminded me of something important, something I should have remembered all along." Luca nodded, unable to speak. He led Thomas and Eleanor out of the mansion, back to the car, back into the night. They drove in silence, the city passing by in a blur of lights and shadows. When they arrived at the building on Carmine Street, Luca helped them carry their belongings inside. The apartment was small but clean, with hardwood floors and large windows that let in the moonlight. Eleanor stood in the center of the living room, turning slowly, tears streaming down her face. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Thomas placed a hand on Luca's shoulder. "Thank you for everything. You saved our lives." Luca shook his head. "You saved the Don's father. I just drove the car." But even as he said it, he knew it was not true. He had made a choice. He had broken the rules. He had chosen mercy over loyalty, and somehow, impossibly, it had been the right choice. He left them there in their new home and drove back into the night. But as he drove, he could not shake the feeling that the story was not over, that Vincent De Luca still waited in the darkness, chained and broken, that Marco Vitale still did not know the full truth, that the machinery of the family was still turning, grinding toward some inevitable reckoning, and Luca knew, deep in his bones, that the price of mercy had not yet been fully paid. 3 days passed before Marco Vitale learned the truth. Luca had returned to his routine, driving for the family, waiting in alleys, ferrying capos to meetings and soldiers to jobs. But something had changed inside him. The weight of silence felt heavier now, the machinery of violence more visible, more suffocating. He checked on Thomas and Eleanor every evening, bringing groceries, making sure they were settling into their new home. They thanked him each time, their gratitude genuine and unguarded, and each time Luca felt the gulf widen between the man they thought he was and the man he knew himself to be. On the third night, Luca received a call from Marco. "The Torino Club. Now." The line went dead before Luca could respond. He drove through the rain-slicked streets, his stomach tight with dread. Something in Marco's voice had been different, colder, sharper, the voice of a man who had discovered a betrayal. When Luca arrived, the club was dark except for a single light burning in the back room. He parked and entered through the side door, following the narrow hallway to the room where the family held its private meetings. The door was open. Marco sat at the table alone, a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses in front of him. "Sit," Marco said. Luca sat. Marco poured 2 glasses and slid one across the table. Luca did not touch it. "You know what I learned today?" Marco asked, his voice calm, almost conversational. "I learned that the old couple you've been helping, Thomas and Eleanor Brennan, are living in a building owned by the Don. A building the Don gave them. No rent, no conditions, just handed it over like a gift." Luca said nothing. His mind raced, calculating the angles, the lies, the ways this conversation could end. "And you know what else I learned?" Marco continued. "That the Don summoned you to the estate 3 days ago, that he had a private meeting with you, that he invited the Brennans to dinner. All of this happened and you said nothing to me. Why is that, Luca?" "The Don told me not to," Luca said quietly. Marco's eyes narrowed. "The Don told you not to tell me? The underboss? The man who gives you your orders?" "Yes." Marco leaned back in his chair, studying Luca with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. "Do you know what that means, Luca? Do you know what it means when the Don keeps secrets from me?" Luca said nothing. He knew exactly what it meant. It meant Marco's authority was being undermined. It meant the Don did not trust him with the full story. It meant cracks were forming in the foundation of the family's hierarchy. "It means something is wrong," Marco said, answering his own question. "It means the Don is making moves I don't understand. And when I don't understand something, Luca, I get nervous. Because in this life, the things you don't understand are the things that get you killed." Marco poured himself another glass of whiskey and drank it in one swallow. "So I did some digging. I asked around. I talked to people who remember the old days back when Antonio Greco ran things. And you know what I found out? I found out that Thomas Brennan saved Antonio's life in 1973, gave him blood, kept him alive when everyone thought he was going to die. And I found out that the Don made a promise to protect Thomas and his family, a promise he forgot, a promise that got broken when Vincent De Luca threw them out on the street." Luca remained silent, his hands folded on the table, his face unreadable. "You didn't know any of this when you helped them," Marco said. "You just saw 2 old people in the rain and decided to play the hero. And somehow, by pure dumb luck, you stumbled into a debt the Don had forgotten. A debt that goes all the way back to his father. A debt that makes you look like a saint. and makes me look like a fool." Marco's voice dropped, cold and dangerous. "Do you have any idea what that does to me, Luca? Do you have any idea how it looks when a driver knows more about the Don's business than the underboss?" "I didn't know," Luca said. "I swear, I didn't know about the history. I just wanted to help them." Marco slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump. "I don't care what you wanted. I care about what it looks like. I care about the fact that the Don is making decisions behind my back. I care about the fact that my authority is being questioned because a driver decided to grow a conscience." Luca met Marco's gaze, his voice steady. "What do you want from me?" Marco stood and walked to the window, staring out at the empty street. "I want you to understand something, Luca. This family is built on order, on hierarchy, on everyone knowing their place and staying in it. When that order breaks down, when people start making their own decisions, when loyalty becomes negotiable, everything falls apart. And I will not let that happen. Not on my watch." He turned back to Luca, his expression hard. "The Don may have forgiven you. He may have rewarded you for your little act of mercy. But I have not. Because what you did, Luca, was not loyalty. It was disobedience. And disobedience cannot be tolerated." Luca felt the air leave the room. He knew what was coming. He had known from the moment Marco called, from the moment he walked into this room, that there would be a price to pay. "Vincent De Luca is still chained up in that meat-packing plant," Marco said. "Still waiting to die, still suffering for his mistakes. And you know what? I'm starting to think he's not the only one who deserves to suffer." Luca's jaw tightened. "Are you going to kill me, Marco?" Marco smiled. It was a cold, mirthless smile, the kind that never reached the eyes. "No, I'm not going to kill you. That would be too easy. And it would make you a martyr, the driver who died for doing the right thing. The Don would never forgive me for that." He walked back to the table and leaned down, his face inches from Luca's. "But I'm going to teach you a lesson. I'm going to make sure you understand the cost of disobedience. I'm going to make sure you never forget your place." Marco straightened and walked toward the door. "Paulie and Dominic are waiting outside. They're going to take you somewhere quiet, somewhere no one will hear you scream, and they're going to remind you what happens when you break the rules." Luca stood, his heart pounding, his mind racing through options. He could run, he could fight, he could beg, but none of it would matter. Marco had made his decision, and in the world of the Greco family, once a decision was made, it was as final as death. The door opened, and Paulie Cenzo and Dominic Russo entered, their faces blank, their hands hanging loose at their sides. They were not here to kill him, but they were here to hurt him, to break something inside him that could never be fully repaired. "Wait!" a voice said from the hallway. Everyone turned. Don Salvatore Greco stood in the doorway, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression calm but absolute. He looked at Marco, then at Luca, then back at Marco. "This meeting is over," the Don said quietly. Marco stiffened. "Don Greco, I know what you were doing," the Don interrupted, "and I am telling you to stop." Marco's face flushed with anger, but he held his tongue. No one argued with the Don. No one questioned his authority, not even the underboss. The Don stepped into the room, and Paulie and Dominic immediately backed away, their heads bowed. The Don walked to the table and looked at Luca. "Leave us," the Don said, his voice directed at everyone except Luca. Marco hesitated, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists, but he nodded and walked toward the door, followed by Paulie and Dominic. The door closed behind them, leaving Luca alone with the Don. The Don sat down in the chair Marco had vacated and gestured for Luca to sit. Luca obeyed, his body tense, his mind still racing. "Marco is angry," the Don said, "and he has every right to be. You disobeyed protocol. You made decisions without consulting him. You undermined his authority. In any other circumstance, I would let him discipline you as he sees fit." The Don paused, his black glass eyes fixed on Luca. "But this is not any other circumstance. What you did, Luca, was not disobedience. It was honor. You saw a debt the family owed and you honored it without even knowing it existed. You acted out of decency, not ambition. And that is rare, rarer than I can express." Luca swallowed hard. "Marco doesn't see it that way." "No," the Don agreed. "Marco sees it as a threat to his power. And in his position I might see it the same way. But Marco forgets something important. This family is not built on fear alone. It is also built on honor, on keeping our word, on remembering the people who helped us when we had nothing. My father understood that, and I understand it now thanks to you." The Don leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But Marco is right about one thing. Order must be maintained. Hierarchy must be respected, and so I am going to make a decision that will satisfy both honor and order. Luca braced himself, unsure what was coming. You will no longer be a driver, the Don said. You will be promoted. You will become a soldier in my personal crew. You will answer directly to me, not to Marco. You will be under my protection, and Marco will understand that your actions were sanctioned by me, that your mercy was an extension of my will. Luca stared at the Don, unable to speak. A promotion, protection, a place in the inner circle. It was more than he had ever imagined, more than he deserved. But understand this, Luca, the Don continued. This promotion comes with a price. You will be watched more closely. You will be expected to prove your loyalty in ways you have not been tested before. And if you ever betray this family, if you ever put your own conscience above the Don's orders again, there will be no mercy, no second chances, only silence. I understand, Luca said, his voice hoarse. The Don stood and extended his hand. Luca took it, feeling the weight of the gesture, the finality of the choice he had just made. Good, the Don said. Now go, and tell Thomas and Eleanor they are safe. Tell them the debt has been paid. Tell them they will never have to fear again. Luca left the Torino club, his mind spinning. He had been saved, promoted, protected, but he had also been bound more tightly to the family, his choices no longer entirely his own. He climbed into the Lincoln and sat behind the wheel, staring at the dark street ahead. Then he drove to the meat-packing plant on Vernon Street. The building was silent when he arrived, the gate still unlocked from the last time Paulie had come to check on Vincent DeLuca. Luca entered through the loading dock and walked to the back room, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. Vincent was still there, chained to the pipe, his body slumped against the wall. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, his skin pale and waxy. He was alive, but barely. A shell of the man who had smiled and called eviction just business. Luca crouched down in front of him. Vincent's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. Luca, Vincent rasped. Please, water, please. Luca stared at him, at the man who had destroyed Thomas and Eleanor's life, who had stolen from the family, who had smiled while doing it. He thought about mercy. He thought about justice. He thought about the price of both. The Don knows what you did, Luca said quietly. He knows you threw out Thomas Brennan. He knows you stole from the family. And he knows you destroyed the life of a man who saved his father. Vincent's eyes widened with terror. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Please, Luca, I'll do anything. The Don has made his decision, Luca interrupted. You're going to die, Vincent, but not like this. Not chained up like an animal. The Don wants it done cleanly, quickly, with respect for the man you could have been. Vincent began to sob, his body shaking, his chains rattling against the pipe. Luca stood and pulled a gun from his coat. It was the first time he had ever held one, the first time he had been asked to do more than drive. The weight of it felt wrong in his hand, heavy and cold and final. Close your eyes, Luca said. Vincent did. His sobs quieted, replaced by shallow, gasping breaths. Luca raised the gun, his hand steady despite the storm raging inside him. He thought about Thomas and Eleanor. He thought about the Don's father. He thought about mercy and justice, and all the ways the two could never truly coexist. Then he pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through the empty building, loud and absolute. Vincent's body slumped forward, the chains holding him upright even in death. Luca stood there for a long moment, staring at what he had done, at the line he had just crossed. Then he turned and walked out of the building, leaving Vincent DeLuca behind, leaving the man he had been behind, stepping into a future he could not yet see. He drove to the building on Carmine Street and knocked on the door of Thomas and Eleanor's apartment. Thomas opened it, his face breaking into a smile when he saw Luca. Luca, come in. Eleanor just made coffee. Luca stepped inside. The apartment was warm, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and the quiet hum of a life beginning to rebuild. Eleanor was sitting in the living room, the photograph on the table beside her, now framed and cleaned. Sit, Thomas said. Please. Luca sat, accepting the cup of coffee Eleanor offered him. They talked for a while, about small things, safe things, the kind of things that filled the spaces between past trauma and future hope. And when it was time to leave, Thomas walked Luca to the door. You've given us our lives back, Thomas said. We can never repay you for that. Luca shook his head. You already did, a long time ago. You just didn't know it. He left them there, in their new home, their new life, and drove into the night. The city stretched out before him, dark and endless, filled with secrets and debts and the machinery of violence that never stopped turning. But somewhere in that darkness, an old couple slept peacefully, safe and warm. Their suffering finally ended. And somewhere in that darkness, a young driver turned soldier carried the weight of his choices, the blood on his hands, the mercy he had given, and the justice he had delivered. The rain began to fall again, washing the streets clean, erasing the tracks, covering the evidence. And in the heart of the Greco family, the wheels continued to turn, grinding forward into a future shaped by loyalty and fear, honor and blood, mercy and vengeance. Luca drove on, into the rain, into the night, into the life he had chosen, and the man he had become. He did not know if he had done the right thing. He did not know if mercy was ever worth the cost. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never look away again. The rain fell. The city breathed. And in the shadows, the story ended where all such stories must end. Not with triumph or tragedy, but with the quiet understanding that in a world built on silence, every act of kindness was a rebellion. Every moment of mercy was a small death of the old self and a painful birth of something new. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough. 2 months later, Don Salvatore Greco stood at the window of his study, looking out at the estate, at the iron gates and the poplar trees and the world beyond. Marco Vitale stood beside him, silent and watchful, his anger cooled but not forgotten. "The old man, Thomas Brennan," the Don said. "He came to see me yesterday." Marco said nothing, waiting. "He wanted to thank me again," the Don continued, "and he wanted to tell me something about his daughter, Caroline. She reached out to him last week. After 20 years of silence, she called. She heard he had moved, heard he was safe, and she wanted to reconnect. They're planning to meet next month." The Don turned to Marco, his expression thoughtful. "Mercy has a way of spreading, Marco, like ripples in water. One act leads to another and another, until the whole pond is changed. My father understood that. He knew that power without honor is just tyranny, and tyranny always falls." Marco nodded slowly. "And Luca?" "Luca is loyal," the Don said. "He will serve this family well. He has proven himself in ways few men ever do. He chose mercy when mercy was dangerous, and he chose justice when justice was necessary. That is the kind of man we need. That is the kind of man who will keep this family strong." Marco said nothing. He understood the lesson, even if he did not like it. Order and hierarchy were important, but so was honor. And in the delicate balance between the two, the Greco family would endure. Far across the city, in a small apartment on Carmine Street, Thomas and Eleanor Brennan sat together on their couch, holding hands, looking at the framed photograph of their daughter. In 2 weeks they would see her again. They would rebuild what had been broken. They would reclaim what had been lost. And they would do it because a driver named Luca Moretti had seen them sitting in the rain and decided that some things were worth saving, even at great cost. The rain stopped. The sun rose. And life, in all its complexity and cruelty and unexpected grace, continued. The end.